I primarily talk about black metal and death metal here on my channel, but ever since I finished up doing the Iceberg charts for those genres, I've always been fascinated with this template to continue it on with other forms of music. So I feel like now is a great time to do one on doom metal. In terms of structure, this Iceberg chart is going to be no different from the previous charts I've done before. I'm not going to bother explaining how these charts work, as this template's been floating around on the internet for a while now, other than the fact that it will contain 8 tiers, and like always, I'm going to be using my own kind of like vocabulary and terms for each tier. And as always, I won't have the amount of time to compile every single doom metal band known to man within this. So again, the way I'm describing each tier, you need to fill in the blanks as to what bands I'm missing out on that you would think would fit within those tiers. So, like always with these Iceberg charts, we start at tier number 1, which I titled Big Doom. Everything within this list is all the big names, so I'm not going to really waste my time explaining what these bands are. If you know what doom metal is, you should know everything compiled within this tier. And getting the most obvious one out of the way first will be Black Sabbath, which I really don't need to waste any time explaining who these guys are, but it's kind of crazy to think about that probably every single band that I'm about to say next within this video from every tier is probably influenced by them in some sort of a way. And it's only fitting that the next band I mentioned right after Black Sabbath is Heaven and Hell, as it consists of members that were in Black Sabbath at least at one point, that being Ronnie James Dio, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler. But as for what are some of the earliest formed bands that took influence from Black Sabbath that need to be mentioned within this tier are Pentagram, Trouble, Saint Vitus, and Witchfinder General. Which, can I just say, I always thought that band name Witchfinder General was always so badass sounding. Then there's Candlemass, which is another essential name within this genre that took doom metal in a more operatic and epic direction. I'd also like to add Reverend Bazaar, a killer doom metal band to come out of Finland that has more of a poetic edge to them. I feel like I need to add in these guys just solely because of the immense popularity that they still have, that being Typo Negative. If you're going for more of a gothic, romantic, and lustful take within doom metal, Typo Negative is a must-know. And the last additions for this tier, which are some of the newer doom metal bands, at least to have formed the 21st century, that I feel like if you're trying to get into doom metal, you should definitely check these guys out, or at least if you keep up with the genre, you have heard and know of them, that being Chemist, Elder, Pallbearer, and Crypt Sermon. All of these bands are definitely worth your time, and I can see as to why they've been gaining more popularity throughout the years. With that all said, we now move down a level within this Iceberg chart to tier number 2, which is Stoner Doom. Well, that term is pretty on the nose here. Everything within this tier consists of stoner doom metal bands. And the two big ones that need to be announced right off the bat that I feel like are the most influential and known are Sleep and Electric Wizard. The two big differences I noticed between the two is that I've always heard that Sleep is kind of like the more spacey and psychedelic, where Electric Wizard is the darker and edgier take within stoner doom metal. And another band that's just as important as Sleep and Electric Wizard for stoner doom metal is Cathedral, which arguably they're the heaviest band within this tier. As for some of the bands that are obviously influenced by what I just mentioned within this tier, you have Weed Eater and Bongzilla, which have more of a sludge metal approach embedded within their style, but as you can tell with their band names, it's all about marijuana with their lyrical themes. Then you have Bong Gripper, which stylistically it's kind of similar to that of Weed Eater and Bongzilla, only it's just instrumental. Then you have Church of Misery, which has some pretty killer tunes that I remember I was quite a fan of when I was just getting into metal. I remember blind buying one of their albums at a Newberry Comics years ago. But what's quite interesting about them is lyrically everything has to do with serial killers. Along with Wind Hand, which has more of a traditional sense within stoner doom metal. Then there's Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats, which is kind of like Electric Wizard with that dark, kind of like edgy nature, but they kind of lean more instrumentally on psychedelic rock and hard rock with their approach. But their album Bloodlust is so good. The riffs within this album are just super infectious. Up next is the band a stoner doom metal band based out of California that has a really unique approach within this style of music. As a majority of their releases, they were just a two-piece consisting of a vocalist who also played bass guitar and a drummer. Yet with their latest full-length album, they included a third member who played keyboards that gave off more melody and a sense of like spirituality in terms of attitude and vibe with their songwriting. I feel like if you're a fan of Sleep, you'll definitely enjoy these guys. I also wanted to include the musician Paul Chain. He used to be the guitarist for the Italian metal band Death SS, but he started his own project under his own stage name, and this is probably the most experimental out of everything within this tier because it's like a mixture of psychedelic rock, stoner doom metal, and space rock. It's very unorthodox from everything within this tier that, again, if you're looking for something very different within stoner doom metal, definitely check out Paul Chain's work. And lastly for this tier will be the band Goatsnake. This is another stoner doom metal band, and this is one of the many bands that Greg Anderson is a part of. And if you know who that is, many other of his bands will be listed later on within this video. But Goatsnake's really interesting, as with their latest full-length album, Black Age Blues, it has the traditional sense of what you're used to with stoner doom metal, but there's elements of blues music embedded within it, especially how the harmonica is utilized within this album, and it kind of gives like its own unique style and twist within the style of stoner doom metal that if you enjoy stoner doom or not, this is definitely an album worth checking out. Moving on down once again within this chart, we've reached tier number 3, which I titled Emotive Doom. As I stated earlier within this video, I've always preferred black metal and death metal along with other forms of just chaotic extreme metal out there. So I'm not the biggest doom metal fan. However, the one thing I personally feel like that doom metal excels in compared to any other form of metal out there is the emotional aspect really is where they shine. One noticeable band and album that perfectly backs up that claim is My Dying Bride with their album Turn Loose the Swans. It's impossible not to have some type of emotional reaction when you hear this album. Jesu is a doom metal band that also blends ambience and shoegaze together. It's one of the many projects done by Justin Broderick, and the emotional aspect about this band is heavily embedded within the lyrical content, as it all has to do with just how upset Justin was when his main band, Godflesh, disbanded, and he dumped all of his emotional turmoil that he was feeling about that event happening at the time onto the lyrical content with the band Jesu. Trees of Eternity is a stellar doom metal band that sadly has a very heartbreaking story attached with it. With their debut full-length album, that being Hour of the Nightingale, it was released in 2016. However, their vocalist, Alia Stanbridge, sadly passed away of cancer in the year of 2014. So she never saw the light of day of this having a fully formed release to the public, but the material that is left over in this album is absolutely gorgeous and emotive, but again, very heartbreaking at the same time. As for the musicians that were a part of Trees of Eternity, I would also recommend checking out Swallow the Sun and October Tide. Both of these bands kind of have the sense of death doom attached with them, but the emotional aspect about them is strongly tied within their overall songwriting. Warning is probably the most emotionally depressing doom metal band that I'm aware of, and with their album Watching from a Distance, it just basically embodies the word despair to the fullest. And while the riffs are very heavy and drag out that tone from start to finish, The thing that really sells me about this album is Patrick Walker's vocal performance. It's very over the top, but it's just filled to the brim with grief and sadness with every verse that he executes, that it's impossible not to feel those emotions coming forth when you hear it. It's honestly some of the best doom metal I've ever heard, just solely because of the emotional aspect. And if you enjoy Warning, I would recommend his other band, that being 40 Watt Sun, that basically carries the same emotional tone, but the songwriting's a bit different, as it's doom metal blended with styles of post-rock and alternative rock. Still just as good, and I would really recommend checking out the album Wider Than the Sky. I'm showing a bit of my bias here, but I also wanted to include my personal favorite doom metal band, that being Kawan, a Finnish doom metal band that also blends styles of neoclassical, neo-folk, post-rock, and ambience together. So they experiment quite a bit. But honestly, whatever album you check out of theirs, you're always going to get this sense of a very emotionally driven band that has this feeling of melancholy and nostalgia attached with it, that they've just never done anything wrong in my book and have just always given grade A material. Closing out this tier will easily be the most unorthodox emotionally driven doom metal band, that being the band called Oxazox or Oxazooks. Either way, that's how you spell the band's name. But Oxazox, in terms of instrumentation, is quite normal for the most part. Sure, it has all the characteristics that you're used to hearing within doom metal. The only thing kind of different is that maybe they'll have some synthesizers and keyboards make up the meat and potatoes of the melodies you'll hear. But the thing that makes them really different is that lyrically it's all done by a made-up language that the vocalist does. And even though I don't understand a single thing that he's saying, you can just feel the despair and emotion being oozed out by just the overall tone and pacing of it. That, yeah, if you want something very different for doom metal and just music, considering the fact that it's a made-up language, definitely check out Oxazox, because I would say that they're the Coctua twins of doom metal. Descending on down, once again, another tier, to tier number 4, which I titled Extreme Doom. This tier consists of doom metal bands that also blend other forms of extreme metal together, such as death metal and black metal. And the first band that I feel like needs to be mentioned, as they're often considered to be the first ever band to blend both death metal and doom metal together, is Goat Lord with their 1987 demo. A handful of other death doom bands that I want to talk about fairly quickly, mainly because I also brought these bands up on a previous Iceberg chart, that being my death metal Iceberg chart, would be Hooded Menace, Paradise Lost, Coffins, and the debut full-length album by Amorphous. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, but I think I also brought this band up too in the death metal Iceberg chart, but I'll bring them up here, once again, that being Rippy Kulu. And I feel like they're really important because, once again, it's another death doom band from Finland, but what makes them important is the fact that they're considered to be the first ever extreme metal band to have lyrics under their own native language, that being Finnish. And two essential death doom albums that are a must-know are Winter's debut full-length album, Into Darkness, and Unholy's debut full-length album, From the Shadows. Just really crushing death doom that are mandatory listenings. Two newer death doom bands that have been gaining a bit of traction throughout the years are Spectral Voice, which I know have members of Blood Incantation, and the band Worm. It's also worth mentioning Acid Witch, I feel like, because again, it's in the style of death doom, but it has a strong essence of psychedelic stoner doom kind of laced with it, even though the real selling point with this band is that they really embody the aesthetic and mindset of Halloween. As for the bands that blend black metal and doom metal together, what I've often noticed is called as one of the first bands to do that style of music, even though they didn't even call it that, was the band Bethlehem. Now, I know I've always called them a black metal band, but when you listen to their debut full-length album, dark metal is what they coined their style of music to be. I feel like it's worth noting within this video because while every black metal band during the early 90s was, capitalizing on the second wave black metal craze of being, aggressive and raw and fast-paced, Bethlehem's dark metal seems to be the only band that was, at least even if they weren't aware of it, playing black metal, but it was a lot slower. And I feel like it's worth mentioning Bethlehem just solely because with dark metal, they kind of started giving the idea to bands that wanted to play black metal that you can still play the style of music and it doesn't always have to be fast-paced. Then there's the band Mizmor, which blends black metal and doom metal together with just an essence of drone kind of embedded within it. And wow, the vocals are very, very abrasive and insanely inhumane. That if you like doom metal, dark and ultra dense, Mizmor might be right up your alley. However, if you don't want black doom to be very abrasive and inhumane, then definitely check out the band DeLorean with their debut full-length album, When All the Laughter Is Gone. Because obviously it's a mixture of black metal and doom metal, but there's a strong essence of like this ritual ambience embedded within their sound that makes it quite creative and something really different that I don't often hear within the realms of either black metal or doom metal. However, if you want more unorthodox black doom, then I would recommend the band Lichgate. It's a mixture of like avant-garde doom metal and black metal mixed together, and with their album An Antidote for the Glass Pill, it feels like something out of like the textbook playbook of something you would hear with Bluthaus Nord, but just way more immersed in the doom metal aspect. And how they blend synthesizers and organs together, it is just really creative and, like, I don't know, mesmerizing at the same time, because other than Bluthaus Nord, them being like a more doom metal version of them, I really don't know who to compare them to. But yeah, I don't really see that many people talk about Lichgate, so if you want something really offbeat within the style of doom metal, definitely check these guys out. And the last band for tier number 4 is going to be Autocrater. That is a mixture of death metal, doom metal, and drone segments scattered throughout it. But man, when the death doom hits, it is so freaking pulverizing. The density of the percussions is going to feel like your head's about to cave in. If you want the heaviest thing within extreme doom, Autocrater is arguably the band that stands head and shoulders above the rest if that's what you're looking for. Descending down the Iceberg chart once again to tier number 5, which I titled Gritty Doom. This list primarily features bands that blend both doom metal and sludge together. Having the slow density of doom metal mixed with the gritty, distorted guitar riffs of sludge go together like peanut butter and jelly. And the two bands that I feel like primarily focus on this style of music that are considered to be fan favorites are both Acid Bath and I Hate God. Some of their best material is considered classics within the fan base. Another band worth mentioning within this tier, and it's another big name, is Boris. And what makes Boris different from Acid Bath and I Hate God is they're not really that consistent with playing one particular style of music, as they've experimented and collaborated with a lot of different artists and done genres such as drone and even post-rock. But with their album Amplifier Worship, they primarily focus on sludge and doom metal, and just like Acid Bath and I Hate God, it's very distorted, it's very heavy, and it'll definitely be in the right mindset and mood if you're looking for the style between both sludge metal and doom metal. I'd also recommend checking out Iron Monkey with their sophomore full-length album, Our Problem. Out of everything within this tier of blending both the doom metal and sludge, This is easily the most aggressive and deranged sounding. And for those who enjoy Iron Monkey and want even the next step after that, definitely check out the band Goat's Blood. It's a mixture of, again, sludge and doom metal, but also mixes together grindcore. Because, you know, doom metal and grindcore, that's totally something that needed to happen, right? I mean, such contrast of styles there, but this band makes it work, and again, just like Iron Monkey, it's very deranged sounding. It's also worth mentioning the band Thou, which again is another band that I've noticed has been gaining more attention throughout the years with all the releases and collaborations they've done. But it's a mixture of sludge and doom along with drone and forms of experimentation that is just bone-crushing heavy. Primitive Man is just like everything I've talked about thus far within this tier, but it also blends a lot of reverb and noise with their style. That I remember catching them live back in 2016, and out of every show I've ever been to, they were easily one of the loudest and most abrasive sounding bands I've ever heard. That was ear-shattering, to say the least. That, yeah, if you want it noisy and abrasive, check out Primitive Man. And if you want even more material like them, then I would recommend checking out the band Indian, because in terms of styles and overall song structure, it's nearly identical to it. Concluding tier number 5 will be the band Upside Down Cross. This is a very ignorant sounding sludge doom band, not just lyrically but also musically. Just how they play their instruments just reeks of ignorance, and it just adds such a fun factor to it in a way, oddly. Also, it's kind of infamously known that this band at one point had Seth Putman, who, as you guys know, is the vocalist for the very infamous grindcore band Anal Cunt, play guitar for this band during some of the live shows towards the end of the 90s until it disbanded, I believe, in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, if you just want aggressive and ignorant sludge doom, check out the band Upside Down Cross. Descending once again, we have reached tier number 6, which is just simply Funeral Doom. Once again, another tier list that's pretty much on the nose when it comes to its title. This consists of all the bands that play in this style, that being Funeral Doom, which is basically doom metal but just heavier, slower, more dense, and more bleak. It's just basically doom metal, but all the things we characterize about it just tenfolded, basically. And what is considered to be the two innovators for this style of music are Thurgothorn with their debut full-length album, Stream from the Heavens, and Skepticism with their debut full-length album, Raven Crow Fleet. Basically everything I just described, these guys really pioneered that sound to the fullest. Evoken is another band that I feel like immediately needs to be brought up here, as they're one of the first that took influence from those two bands from the start. Even their band name Evoken comes from the Thurgothorn demo from one of the tracks that's compiled within that demo. And even their latest album that came out back in 2018 with a massive 6-year gap in between the previous one, they still carry that sound to the fullest. So I feel like if you want to get into Funeral Doom, these first 3 bands I've talked about thus far are kind of like the gateway bands for it. Other big names that are worth mentioning within the realms of Funeral Doom are Shape of Despair, Mournful Congregation, Loss, Bell Witch, and Esoteric. And another respected name worth mentioning is Ahab, who just recently released their latest full-length album only a handful of days ago, and from what I've heard, it sounds stellar. Abysmal Sorrow is another Funeral Doom metal band, but unlike the others I've talked about thus far that have either the death metal growls or clean singing, Abysmal Sorrow has more of a black metal focus with it, not just vocally but also instrumentally. Then you got Void of Silence, which plays around with Funeral Doom with the death metal kind of like growls that you're used to hearing with the vocals. The standout feature with them, however, is that they have a strong emphasis on dark ambience, kind of scattered throughout their songwriting that really makes it all the more cryptic and heavy sounding while still maintaining the very dense nature within Funeral Doom. Definitely a band worth checking out. Ia is another funeral doom metal band that stylistically has all the characteristics and components you're used to hearing within this style of music. However, the standout feature with this project is lyrically it's all sung by a dead language, as an individual behind this project did archaeological study in order to know all the lyrics that he would apply with this band. Closing out tier number 6 of Funeral Doom is going to be Worm Phlegm, which is easily the most disturbing and abrasive out of everything I've heard within Funeral Doom. Supposedly, the vocals you hear within this album were all executed when the vocalist was self-mutilating himself. That way he could hit the right pitch and screams when recording this album. That's all rumors, but it's kind of easy to believe because the vocals are just full of agony and pain, and everything about this release just sounds tormented. Honestly, if you want the most fucked up sounding Funeral Doom album, definitely check out Worm Phlegm. Moving on down to the second to last tier, we've reached tier number 7, that being Drone Doom. And again, another tier title that's very on the nose. As you can guess, everything within this tier is doom metal mixed with drone music. Arguably, the most known band that plays with these two styles of music is, of course, Sun. Again, Greg Anderson being a part of it, as I said way earlier on in this video, his work would pop up once again within this Iceberg chart. And he seems to have this fascination with blending both doom and drone together, because half of this tier consists of his work. But again, easily the most well-known is Sun, mainly for it being the most prolific and successful out of everything he's been a part of. With loads of full lengths and collaborations he's done, Sun has experimented in every which way possible when you're trying to blend both doom and drone together. That's kind of become like the unofficial gateway band if you want to get into this style of music. It'd only be appropriate that the next band I bring up is Earth, the band that heavily influenced Greg Anderson and company when forming Sun. Again, if you want the earliest formation basically of doom and drone music put together, check out Earth if you really want to test your endurance, because their albums are long, to say the least. And if you want even more bands to dive in deeper into this style of music, again, all done by Greg Anderson, then definitely check out Ascended, Teeth of Lions Rule the Divine, and Burial Chamber Trio. Again, all of this is slow, dense, and full of drone, that these songs within these albums range from 12, 20 to even half an hour long. As for the last band within this tier, they're really interesting. It's called Corrupted, and they're a drone doom metal band based out of Japan that, oddly enough, even though they're from that country, most of their lyrics are in Spanish, and there are no interviews of this band. They try to be very anonymous, and they don't allow like promo photos of the band. And stylistically, again, it's that very slow, droney sound that you would come to expect with this style of music, but it's also really abrasive and heavy sounding that, I don't know, it's almost like, as weird as this is to say, because again, it's a mixture of drone and doom metal, it feels like they're the band that wanted to play this style with like a punk attitude, as weird as that is, but it's very interesting and oddly enough entertaining, to say the least, which is something for me personally I wouldn't really say, because I'm quite not the fan of this style of music, but Corrupted is definitely a standout. And finally, we have plummeted to the final tier within this chart, which I call Nightmare Doom. There are only 4 bands I've listed within this tier, mainly because I feel like it's really difficult to find doom metal bands that experiment and play in this style of music, because I feel like all 4 of them are trying to make the listener have their brains deteriorate with how they play out doom metal. I'll start it off with the easiest one to get into of the 4, that being Gnaw with their full-length album, This Face. Now, Gnaw is this experimental noise project that blends power electronics and all other forms of just wild, crazy electronic music. But with this album, there's a strong essence of doom metal kind of scattered throughout it that it reminds me of the chaos and intensity of like Anola Throck meets like the fucked up nature of Gnaw Their Tongues, but just there's this doom metal aspect about it that I would feel like it would appeal to extreme metal fans that just want something very deranged and chaotic. But yeah, other than this, as this being the most accessible, I guess you could say, within this tier, everything else is just eesh. Because next up is Sewer Goddess. This is her latest full-length album from 2015. Now, Sewer Goddess, again, is another project that blends noise and power electronics together, but with this album, she blended death industrial and doom metal together. And if you ever wondered what those styles of music would sound like, well, it's a thing on this latest Sewer Goddess album, and god damn, it is punishing. Like, every millisecond within it, it just feels like it's meant to punish you and make your brain snap in half. Second to last will be Black Bile. This demo right here is very dark, very grim, and very disturbing. Like, it sounds like it was recorded in these dark, deep catacombs that no one is permitted to enter. It sounds like a sacred evil place is what this sounds like it was recorded in. And while the production value is very lo-fi, it just adds to the disturbing nature because everything's abrasive and brittle sounding. Nothing about this sounds comforting. There's a lot of reverb with the vocals. The riffs just kind of sound like it was meant to just carry noise more than anything else within it. If you just want very abrasive, raw, and just unwelcoming sounding music, if that sounds appealing for whatever reason, definitely give Black Bile a shot. And the final inclusion for this Iceberg chart is going to be Senthil. Good Lord Almighty, have mercy on my soul, is what I say when I listen to this. Because I remember discovering this back years ago on YouTube, and the genre was listed within the title, and it was characterized as funeral noise. Having the despairing density of funeral doom mixed with the harsh and abrasive nature of noise music put together is what this is. And everything about this is just so unsettling and disturbing. Because the guitar riffs, if you want to call it that, all it does is give you the density of funeral doom, but it's done in the most abrasive and harshest way possible, that there's really no rhythm to it. It only feels like it's meant to carry out noise more than anything. And the fucking vocals, holy god, the vocals, how do I describe the vocals? probably some of the most agonizing and miserable and tormented vocals I've ever heard within music itself. And I've heard my fair share of vocals within metal, but nothing about this seems correct. Everything about it seems abnormal, and it's just like meant in the most pain-inducing way possible. Like, it doesn't sound natural at any point. Everything about this album just gives off negative emotion in the most disturbing way possible, I feel like. That if you really want to test your limits of what any kind of music can attach itself within doom metal, I truly believe that Synthel is the bottom of the pit for an Iceberg chart if you're talking about doom metal. And that'll finally do it, guys, for the doom metal Iceberg chart. Like always, these are fun to make, and I plan on doing more within the future. And yeah, that'll do it for this video, guys. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.